All right, so several of you had asked about questions for the quiz or answers for the quiz. So here we go. So I put it all on one page so that way we can kind of answer it together. So we have labor, we have our output, which would be our total product. And then if we wanted to, we could make room for marginal product and average product. Okay, so the marginal output of the fifth worker. So when we hire the fifth worker, how much more did they add to the group? The answer would be 40 because 4 workers make 360, the fifth worker makes 40 additional. So that's the marginal output, the marginal productivity. The average output of the seventh worker, so that's our TAQ triangle, of which I think I made reference to in the review or in the Twitch stream yesterday. So if you are unfamiliar with this, that's why. So if I'm looking for the average, so what this means, what this triangle is the total of anything equals the average of anything times the quantity because they're on the same plane, so average times quantity. So in this case, if we're looking for the average product, the average output, we can cover this A up. And then the equation becomes the total product divided by the quantity will get you the average. So if we look at the seventh worker, we're going to put in 430 divided by 7, which is what, 6 point something? I don't have a calculator, so I'm just going to do like 6 point something. Or would it be, I'm sorry, 60 something. So I'm just going to, because I don't have a calculator, you can plug that in. So number 3, with which worker does diminishing returns set in? So diminishing returns refers to when the marginal productivity of a worker starts to decrease. So I'm going to go ahead and have to calculate the marginal product until I start to notice a dip. So the marginal productivity of the first worker is 100 because it adds 100 to basically nothing because no workers. The second worker, while 2 workers are able to make 220, the second worker adds how many more, or the marginal product would be 120. The third worker adds 80, and so at this point, diminishing returns sets in. And the phrasing we would use is after the hiring of the third worker or with the addition of the third worker, then diminishing returns sets in. It's not the second because marginal product is still increasing. We're still in that first stage in workers 1 and 2. Diminishing returns only sets in with the addition of worker number 3. And which workers represent diminishing returns? So we know it's 3, and then it's going to continuously go until it hits negative, which in this case it doesn't. So the fourth worker adds 60, then 40, then 20, and then it's still plus 10. So from workers 3 to 7 represents that diminishing returns where marginal product continually gets smaller. And then why will diminishing returns always exist in the short run? It's because of the bottlenecks that exists as more variable inputs surround a fixed input. So I used the example yesterday of a Subway restaurant. So the more workers, those are your variable inputs, the more workers that go in to the Subway restaurant, which is going to be our fixed input because we're not going to change the size of that, then it's going to eventually create bottlenecks and slow down production as workers are less able to specialize in that small of a space. So the second one, very similar, so I'll just kind of go through this pretty quickly. What is the marginal output of the fourth worker? That would be 15. What is the average output of the fifth worker? So 70 divided by 5, which is 14. And this is dollars. No, I'm sorry. So that'd be 14 units, 14 widgets per day. With which worker does diminishing marginal return sets in? So if I just quickly do marginal product, is 10, 15, 20, and then 15. So it's with the addition of the fourth worker that diminishing return sets in. Which worker represents increasing marginal returns? Which workers? So that would be workers 1, 2, and 3 because the marginal productivity is rising. 1 through 3. which workers represent negative returns. So if I just kind of continue, this is still positive 10, positive 5, and then negative 3 and negative 4. So it'd be workers 7 and 8. And then this is the same question as before. What is the source of short-run diminishing returns? It's because of those variable, those workers around the fixed input eventually create bottlenecks where marginal productivity begins to fall. So looking at the graph then, this is a little different view. So if you did this, so what level of labor is total product maximized? And that would be L3. If you notice, it kind of looks like, obviously it's not L1 because it's still rising. It's not L2 because it's still rising. It's L3. It doesn't ask you to explain, but the reason being is that's when marginal product is 0. And so once marginal product goes negative after L3, then total product begins to fall as well. So at what level, next question, at what level of labor does diminishing returns begin? So that's when marginal product is at its maximum at point A, which would be, and it's hard to tell, but that would be at L1. That's when diminishing returns sets in or begins. At what level of labor is average product at its maximum? Well, that's B, when it crosses over the marginal product curve, because the marginal pulls the average. And which of the following ranges of labor usage shows increasing marginal returns? So that would be between 0 and L1. And then from L1 to L3, which is not an option, would be diminishing returns. And then from L3 to, whenever would be negative returns. Now, this will be something for Thursday's lesson for the IB kids, but it is, I'll just kind of go over a little bit so that you can, maybe it'll kind of help. So first equation for this chart is total cost equals fixed plus variable. So you just simply add that together. So 1,500 plus 0 would give us 1,500. So something plus 8,000 would give us 9,500, and so 1,500. And so one thing as you get into the idea of fixed cost is the word fixed means unchanging. So 1,500 is always going to be my fixed cost regardless of how much I produce. And the example I gave in the Twitch chat yesterday was a lemonade stand. You buy a table, you buy a pitcher, and it doesn't matter how much lemonade you make, you're going to buy one of them. So it's a fixed cost. So then I can fill out, 23,000. Again, I don't have a calculator, so I'm not going to bother. 1,500 plus X equals 23,000 gives me some number. Now, for this 400 units, I don't have variable or total, so I can't use this equation of fixed plus variable equals total. I have to use a different one. And that's where the TAQ triangle comes into play. So in this case, if I'm looking for, and this is total variable, this is total fixed, and this is obviously just the total cost. So if I'm looking for the total variable cost, I can take the average variable cost times the quantity. So I'm covering up the T for total variable cost. And we always have to use the TAQ triangle with like things. We can't just pick like the total variable cost equals the average fixed cost times quantity. So it has to be the same. So the average variable cost of 400 units. So total variable cost equals average variable cost times the quantity. So at this quantity of 400, the average variable cost is $27.50. So that's another way that I can find those total costs is by using that triangle. Now when I get to a point like here with average total cost, then I can simply, again, cover up the A, and I would take the total cost, which for 500 units is $16.5 here, times the quantity, which is 500. So you multiply those two numbers together, you're going to get average total cost. Then, lastly, with marginal cost. So marginal cost is the change in total cost over the change in quantity. Most of the time in these charts, we're going up by 1 unit. But in this case, we're going up by 100. So the marginal cost, the way we get this 50 is we're taking, well, total cost changes by 5,000 divided by the 100 unit change. So the marginal cost refers to the cost of one additional unit, not 100 additional units. So that's why we have to divide out, in this case, by 100. So for this marginal cost, it would be the 3,000, 9,500 minus 6,500. That's how much additional it costs to produce the 200th unit or 200 units, divided by, what did I say, 3,000? Divided by the 100 unit change from 100 to 200 means that the marginal cost would be 30. And then I can keep going down and looking at those numbers that way. And then for this blank page, the answer key is behind it, so I'll just go straight there. So when output is 50 units, the AFC is 80. And how we got that was the fixed cost for Laszlo's lawn, Rangers rent the building, interest is $4,000 a month. So that's the fixed cost, the total fixed cost. So when we divide that by 50, again, using that TAQ triangle, we get that $80. The marginal cost of producing 40 lawnmowers instead of 30, so the difference in cost is 11,000, but the units are changing by 10, so we got to divide by 10 and get the 1,100. As the marginal cost of producing between 30 and 40 lawnmowers, the marginal cost of each additional lawnmower, the one, is 1,100. So when output is 60, ATC is blank and AVC is blank. So the total cost is 62,000. So if we take that divided by 60, that's the average, we would get some number. And again, I'm sorry, I'm going quickly and I don't have a calculator, so that equals whatever that equals. Then, if total cost equals fixed cost plus variable cost, if we divide both sides by quantity, this equation is still equal. So that would mean that the average total cost would equal the average fixed cost, because that's fixed cost divided by quantity, plus the average variable cost, because that's total variable cost divided by the quantity. So then 4,000 divided by 60 would give us some number, and then that's how we arrive at these two numbers. So this 62,000 divided by 60 is this 1,033.33, and then that would mean that 4,000 divided by 60 would be 2/3, so it would be $67. Yeah, $67 or so. And so that's how we arrive at this for average variable cost. All right, so we did this. Marginal cost of an output of 70, we do the same thing. So that's 26,000 divided by 10 would give us 26, which is 1,100 more than the marginal cost at 60, which would be 15,000 divided by 10 would be 1,500. And so there's the difference. Will AFC be greater or smaller? Well, because fixed cost is always 4,000, the shape of the average fixed cost curve is always decreasing between the dollars and the quantity. So the more lawnmowers produced, AFC will always be decreasing the more that's produced. So which curves are U-shaped? These three curves, and we'll get into that in the lesson. Marginal cost is like the Nike swoosh. Average variable cost is also U-shaped, as is average total cost. Which the following is true. Fixed costs do not depend on the level of output. It must be paid regardless of how much is produced. And then this is what is correct. I'm sorry. Which one is incorrect? That's right. So if I had read it better, then I would have realized that that was true. So this D is what is incorrect, because marginal cost is the change in total over the change in quantity.